Holidays and gatherings can be extremely tough mentally and emotionally for a lot of people, but more so for women in the LGBTQ plus community for a variety of reasons. It's beginning to look a lot like Christmas, can really feel like it's beginning to look a lot like dysfunctional families for many of us. You may be wondering how to navigate and feel comfortable with your own experience this year when the narrative around you focuses on nothing but an idealized version of a holiday season that doesn't involve the reality of what many of us have going on in our lives. For some, if you're visiting family, you may feel as if you've got to hide who you really are, not talk about your life or your partner, or you may feel that you've got to tone it down with your dress or gender expression to pacify those judgmental and disapproving family members. Some of you may be struggling with knowing how to deal with bigoted family views, or even find yourself navigating a season that's filled with yet another reminder of the isolation and physical or emotional loneliness that comes from family estrangement at a time when the theme of togetherness and celebrating is on center stage in December. Hurt, loss, sadness, and loneliness is amplified into a huge zoom lens at Christmas. Everything can feel intensified and pressured. The pressure to have the most perfect holiday season just seems to be getting bigger and bigger as the years go on. And the reality is that all this does is leave you feeling deeply disconnected and separate from what can seem like the rest of the world around you, having fun on the outside everywhere you look, on the TV, when you're out shopping, at work, when you're with your friends. And on the inside, you're left feeling emotionally empty and anxious at the prospect of not feeling it or being able to be a part of this time of year. I've always wondered how many of you wouldn't be feeling the heavy feelings of shame, missing out, or inadequacy by not being able to meet these performative societal expectations if just more realistic and inclusive messages around the holiday season were acknowledged or advertised on the same level as all the rest. So if this is you, if you're feeling like you're dreading Christmas and it's stirring up uncomfortable emotions and anxiety inside of you, today I'm going to be sharing some tips and thoughts to get you through this period and out onto the other side. If this is a time of year that you find difficult to manage, or you're struggling with some of the things that I've mentioned, then this episode has been put together especially for you. So my intention is to today just provide you with 8 solid, relatable and realistic tips that you can put into action right now to help you feel a bit more balanced with your mental and emotional health, to take the pressure off so you don't continue to take on and internalize disempowering messages about who you are or how you measure up, just because it seems as if the world outside of you appears to be engaged with what feels like something completely different to what you are feeling on the inside. I'm going to be sharing a bit about my experiences with this time of year too, because sometimes it's an honest and relatable story that begins to help you feel that what you're feeling is valid and normal. I guarantee you're not alone if you are feeling this way. Think about it. 1 in 5 families has a split, and at least one family member isn't talking to the other. Almost half of families have a divorce, and 1 in 3 adults struggle with their mental health. Trust me, it's completely normal to have the blues and to feel the pressure during December. So as well as offering up some tips and advice and sharing about my experiences, I'm going to be responding to a live question that I've had from inside the Braver Women Facebook community from one of our members that's also experiencing some pressure around feeling like she's enough to be able to manage expectations during the holiday season. So to start with, let's get into it. Let me share with you my take. If you were to ask me how I feel about this time of year, I think as I reflect, I've got quite an indifferent view about Christmas, and it's not something that I could get particularly revved up about. And I don't think I've felt excited about Christmas since I was a child. But as I've moved into adulthood, I've learned to see past all the hype, the utopia marketing, and just to lower my expectations to a more realistic level about what it means to me outside of family and performative societal expectations. I think the thing that I enjoy most about Christmas and this time of year is simply the feeling of closure, the feeling of just winding down the end of the year, with it being marked by some sort of celebration and an opportunity to just see and connect with my friends. I personally like the peace and the space and the intimacy that the shorter and the quieter days in the winter months bring over Christmas. It means I can walk my dog on the beach without having to go through hordes of people, and I can really find that space in my mind just to reflect and just feel good. So I've had really mixed experiences with the holiday season. As a kid, I loved it. I was really excited. I believed in Santa and just got involved with all the magic. I think most children do. But Christmas started to take on a different shape for me as I grew up and got into my early and late teens, because of a lot of the family dysfunction that I'd been surrounded by. I was regarded as the black sheep of the family, and more so after coming out. And I remember returning home after living away at university. I remember the very first Christmas that I wasn't welcomed home. I just turned 18 and I'd been kicked out. And in my family, there was just arguments, drama, hostility, poor communication, and fear. They were the main themes, particularly after my dad left. And the relationship that I had with my mum was strained, to say the least. It was unpredictable and downright hostile. And she was going through her own pain. And what little connection we had completely dissolved over the years. I remember that after a few months of not communicating, after I'd been kicked out, I started to get that anxiety about where I'd be spending Christmas. And I was sleeping on my friend's sofa as a short-term measure at the time. And I remember the words so vividly when I called home a few weeks before just to test the waters. Find yourself somewhere else to go for Christmas because you won't be coming here. And I remember putting the phone down and I did not know what to do with myself. It felt like the ultimate rejection, and everything else I'd experienced growing up just paled into insignificance. In that moment, I felt scared and I felt really alone. I didn't have anywhere to live and I just wanted to be welcomed back into the fold. But it was just not going to happen. But that year, I was blessed with close friends. It was really hard and I felt a whole host of emotions and completely internalized everything. If I could just be this, or if I could just do that, then this wouldn't be happening to me. Just taking on all of that blame and self-sabotage. And I remember the deep shame I felt when I told my friends that I had nowhere to go for Christmas, because it was the first time that I felt really exposed to have to talk about openly why my family behaved towards me the way they did after years of just hiding it. And even I couldn't explain it when they asked questions, because at the time I didn't really understand it myself. I was too young. For years as a child, I carried the shame of how my family operated, hidden deep down inside of me. But in that moment, there was nowhere to hide when I revealed it to my friends. And I think that's one of the things that really helped me that year, was through the painful emotions, finding the courage to be honest and open about everything so that my friends could understand and see the big picture. And as it happens, I was kindly invited over for dinner at my friend's mother's house for that afternoon. And still to this day, 26 years on, I don't think my friend Sue will ever know just how grateful I was for that display of empathy and kindness. Even though I was sat there around the table with family that I didn't know, with an unmistakable feeling of just feeling like an outsider and a burden and that deep sense of unworthiness, I just didn't acknowledge at the time. I was too young myself, and I wasn't strong enough to handle the prospect of my own company, never mind spend Christmas in an empty flat. But from that particular year, from that moment on, my exclusion had set the precedents for how Christmas was going to be for me and my family. And as the years progressed, the on-off relationship with my family had just evolved more and more. And my invitations and presents at my family home for Christmas became dependent on variables and conditions which chopped and changed like the wind year in, year out. Don't do this, don't say that, to now you've got a dog and we don't want her in the house. So you can come, but find somewhere else to put your dog. And still, the arguments, criticism, and the typical family role-playing dysfunction continued, just leaving me feeling on edge. So now, no longer that unsure 18-year-old, I've grown through a lot of my tough familial experiences, recognized the impact they had on me over my younger years, and I've gained a lot of wisdom from all of that I now incorporate into my therapy practice. As an independent, emotionally stable and well-adjusted adult at 44, I no longer spend Christmas with my family. I don't rely on, but I now choose to spend my time with my chosen family, my closest friends who are kind, honest, and accept me and love me for who I am, and welcome me and my dog into their home. They are fully aware of everything I've experienced over the years and are the most supportive and loving people I've ever met. And it used to seem strange to drive north where I'm from to spend Christmas about 15 minutes away from my actual blood family. But over the years, this is something that has definitely become way more palatable over time, simply by the fact that I've profoundly altered my perspective on many things, which has made it far easier to accept my situation with my family and actually see my approach and attitude as a really positive thing for me now. Part of that massive shift in perspective was through heavy mental lifting. It wasn't easy over the years. The messy and complicated process of falling down and getting back up and taking on the lessons, but ultimately disrupting some of the core ideas and belief systems that I'd learned to take on about myself and how things should be that were passed on to me growing up. And so because of this, I want to share some of that wisdom with you now. So if this story or what I've said sounds relatable or familiar to you in any way, a big part or a small part, I want you to recognize the following. And this is that tip number one: if you are estranged from your family, I want you to remember it's not about you. It's about the untenable connection. And that untenable connection can be born from complex, interconnected factors such as trauma, past hurt, resentment, and emotional disconnect. There's nothing wrong with you. It's easy to internalize their rejection to mean that somehow you're fundamentally flawed or that there's something wrong with you. But this isn't about you. It might feel like anger and hate being directed at you. But it's about the untenable connection that creates a dysfunctional culture. So let me explain this. Dysfunctional families aren't interested in learning a functional way of behaving, and that won't change just because of the holidays. Instead, it's about the culture of dysfunction in the ingrained patterns of poor communication, shouting, blaming, defensiveness, zero emotional literacy, and a complete lack of empathy or respect. No matter how hard you try, sometimes you can feel like you're banging your head against a brick wall. It's so much easier for some people to be angry and hateful than it is to let their guard down underneath all of that and expose and actually confront what's really driving those emotions, which underneath that hostility or anger are usually fear of vulnerability, sadness, and deep hurt. Often it's safer and less stressful to stay away. And I think sometimes their shutting down can actually be the healthiest things that they can do, rather than continue to draw you into their drama triangle and their dysfunction with their own emotions. And I want to say this again because I really want to emphasize this for you. Do not blame yourself if you are estranged. this is not about you. It's not about them. It's about the culture that's been brought to the table. And very often, it was there long before you arrived at that table. And I've always found this with my clients. The clients who work with me who are estranged are the ones who actually have the emotional intelligence, the willingness to communicate in a healthy way, the openness, empathy, and the respect. The problem is that feels like a foreign language to dysfunctional families because they just cannot connect to that. They connect more readily and easily to the toxic behaviors that derive from their uncomfortable emotions, with a complete lack of awareness and a strong conviction that their behaviors and ways of communicating are right. And what you bring into that communication dynamic will always be wrong. But they won't be able to see that it's about the communication. They will make you feel, if you allow it, to be about you as an individual. And I think this is really important for you to understand, because their apparent rejection isn't about you. It's about the inability to fully connect to the functional behaviors that you want to bring to the table. I still love my family deeply. I can't sit here and say I don't. But what I don't love is the abnormal relational connection. Maladaptive behaviors are not maladaptive people. It means they don't see the value in or don't want to learn to have the capacity to connect to you in a healthy way. I'm not saying this to minimize the impact that estrangement has on you, but I wanted to give you something constructive to think about so that you can zoom out a bit and see what's going on outside of the hurt from both sides of the coin. You have value even if your family doesn't appreciate you. Be proud of who you are and how you've grown as a person without them. And just think, if you know you are part of a dysfunctional family and are trying to cope with the holidays peacefully, that in itself shows that you are healthier than the dysfunction that exists. So this leads me on to the next concept to help you. Family is not always about blood. It's about bonds. Think about it. We're born to random people and grow up with random human beings who we call our siblings and relatives. We don't get to choose our family members, and just because they are family does not mean you're obliged to be around them if they're not loving and supportive, and it's going to be detrimental to your mental well-being. Just because it's Christmas doesn't mean you have to go back to that culture or environment that on the surface is called family, but inside the idea, it resembles anything but love, respect, and support. And I think, like me, more and more queer people end up finding their own tribe of close friends who they eventually go on to call their family. Friends who provide all the acceptance, safety, and understanding. So talk to them. Tell them what you're experiencing if you're finding it tough, and take a deep breath and let yourself move past the shame you're feeling if you have to get honest about feeling vulnerable and lonely. The friends who love you will want to know, they'll want to know what about that, and they'll also want to help. So open up and let them. So the next tip that I want to give you, if you are making the decision to go home and be around your family this Christmas, is to decide upon your role and create a new narrative around your family. What I mean when I say this, sometimes being around people you love brings out the worst in you. And outside of awareness, when we are around family members, throw in a good old dose of alcohol and we can get defensive and regress into roles. Every family dynamic has them. The caretaker, the pleaser, the black sheep when in anxiety-inducing situations. So however much we've grown up, our old behaviors might still be there below the surface. And it's high-pressure situations like Christmas where expectations and emotions run high that bring them out. So defensiveness is in my opinion, the gateway to arguments. And when you feel defensive, you're already in a state of anxiety, and there's no delete button in our brain. As we change and grow, we lay down new neural pathways on top of old ones, and it's easy to choose those new ways of behaving in low stress situations. And it becomes increasingly difficult the more stress we find ourselves under. Essentially, during stressful situations, our brain goes into autopilot and chooses the neural pathway that's most established for the situation that we find ourselves in. So your main aim, if you are going back into the family fold at Christmas, should be relate to your family as the adult you now are, and create that new narrative about who you really are, rather than the person that you were around 10, 15 or 20 years ago. Before you return home for Christmas, take some time to think about how you want to relate to your family as your adult self. See if you can note down some specific behaviors that you would want to actively engage in this Christmas. Maybe you want to set certain boundaries or behave in a different way during a predictable situation with a predictable family member. I think the value of this type of preparedness, shall we say, helps you to reduce that defensiveness and remain more in alignment with who you really are in an authentic way. So moving on, this is in order, by the way, to help you. So the next one that I've got for you is to have a repertoire to set your limits and boundaries. This is really, really important. Part of this preparation for facing family members who are difficult, or families that have a level of dysfunction in them. If you're heading back and you're feeling anxious that you're going to be getting a bunch of comments or questions, maybe you've just come out, changed your hairstyle or your dress sense, maybe you've left your spouse or have a new partner, then I think it's safe to say that you can expect questions. Now, I have two thoughts on this, but before I talk about setting limits and enforcing boundaries, I want to get you to just lower your guard a little bit and think about this. Sometimes questions are an opportunity for understanding rather than judgment, and relaxing into this can help you to decide what you want to talk about. There's a massive difference between questions and curiosity and questions for follow-up with criticism. Sometimes family members are genuinely interested and want to try and understand you a bit more. They may be a bit clunky and awkward with their delivery, but it's really important to discern between the two. So a genuine question often comes up in a relevant and respectful context, whereas nosiness and intrusiveness may feel intrusive or come out of nowhere without a natural lead up in the conversation, leaving you feeling exposed and pressured. So here's what I want you to think about when it comes to limits and boundaries, because they aren't the same thing. And I see so much disempowering advice going on out there around boundaries. It definitely involves more than just saying no. So a limit is internal and a boundary is external. A limit is about you deciding upon and managing your internal threshold and well-being. And a boundary is about you managing and protecting your interactions with others. So decide what your limits are in this situation, what you're happy to talk about and what you're not. How you're happy to be spoken to and how you're not. Sometimes we can get caught off guard with not knowing what to say, to be boundary assertive with close family relatives, because their familiarity with you means that they can often think that they can have a backstage pass to your life. It's important to recognize that you have a right to privacy even with your family members, because plain and simple, it's your life, not theirs. Setting limits around what and how much you want to reveal to family members can make so many feel nervous, which is why it's important to plan how to deal with these types of situations by getting clear beforehand on what your limits are for certain family members, and then advocating them with an active boundary. Phrases like, not just now, I may talk about that another time. I'd rather talk about you, or not today, that's off the menu for today. Or a plain and simple, right now, that's not up for discussion. These phrases can help you. So practice it. Practice some phrases, say it out loud, say it calmly, and most importantly, with certainty. It doesn't have to be curt or rude. Often it's not what we say that has the most impact. So please recognize that you can still sound confident whilst being calm. Whatever you do, don't apologize. Phrases like, I'm sorry, but, weaken your position and make it sound like it's up for negotiation. Remember, calm, confident, and precise in these situations is best. Setting limits allows you to very clearly see what's starting to go beyond your threshold of personal comfort. You can still keep it matter of fact to begin with, and after a second time, then that's where you get to prepare and decide what your exit strategy is out of that conversation by implementing your boundary. Think about it like this. You set your internal threshold limit and close the protective gate around you with your boundary when it gets too much. So closing the boundary gate could involve a consequence like exiting conversations, withdrawing from situations, asking them to leave, or even leaving yourself. Remember that a boundary is only a boundary when it's followed up by a consequence. And the consequence is not for others. We can't make others do what we want, even when we set limits and enforce with boundary behaviors. But preparing in advance can really help you to decide and navigate what to do when it gets a bit difficult. So 1, your limits. 2, phrases that communicate you've reached your limit. And 3, deciding on your boundary. When you do it in this way, it will help you to know what to do when you aren't being treated in a way that you would like. And this leads me on to the next point. Christmas is not the time to educate. And this is where I've got a bit of a let them theory interconnected with this. Let them. If you're likely to come across bigoted attitudes, snarky comments, and an opportunity, if you let them, to give away your personal power, then remember this. You're not going to change someone's mind in a single conversation of something that they've been chewing on, an idea that they've been chewing on for years in a single bite. And I think it's important for your own well-being to recognize this and to take a step back by what we've just talked about so far. Often the most powerful thing that you can do to maintain your own personal power in any situation, not just Christmas, but dealing with bigoted people who judge or criticize, who want to give you their latest take on trans people, for example, is to take a deep breath. Start to slowly and steadily breathe out. I talk a lot about diaphragmatic breathing in my Facebook group for braver women, and because it works. When you breathe out, you start to put the brakes on your nervous system and you start to induce calmness, because what's really going on inside of you when you become activated by someone else's comments is you go into a state of anxiety, and any one of the fight, flight, or freeze responses will take place. And when that happens, you can't outrun that response. You can't outthink it. Your body, you become entirely beholden to your body. And so the best thing that you need to do is just to slow down your out-breath, because it's the out-breath that puts the brakes on. It's the out-breath that activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which sends a signal to your brain to tell the anxious part of your brain that you're safe and that you don't need to keep using that response. If you think about it, anxiety is like the body in exercise mode while you're still. And if you start panting or you can't control your breath, then those stress hormones preparing you to run will keep firing around your body. But when you actually take control of your breath and you steady your out breath, particularly when someone is talking to you and you're feeling yourself getting triggered, when you take control of that out breath, you are almost hijacking that part of your brain. You're sending a clear signal back that you don't need to be heightened. You don't need to be flooded with those stress hormones. They can come in pretty handy in a lot of life or death situations, but certainly not when you're having a discussion. So taking control of your breath, taking a breath in and slowly breathing it out to the count of 10, if you can, or longer, will really start to, you'll start to feel after a few moments, after a few minutes, your nervous system start to come back down. And I think the use of silence can be particularly important, because when you choose to use silence, you're choosing to communicate very clearly that you're not willing to engage, that you're not willing to get drawn in. Learning to be comfortable with silence returns your power, and it lets them, very often, it lets them feel the gravity of what they've just said without you having to engage in some sort of disagreement or try to educate. Because remember, you're not going to change minds. You're not in a single conversation. And I'm not advocating that you use silence as a manipulative tactic, but it's actually a powerful communication tool, because you're not going to allow yourself to get drawn in. You're not going to go toe-to-toe with this person conversationally. You just recognize that ignorance is a poor substitute for wisdom. And it doesn't matter what you say. It doesn't matter what idea you bring to the table. If they're fixated on telling you what they think, you're not going to change their mind. You're just not. You will get a sense for the type of conversations where openness and curiosity is sought. You will get a feel for that. But you're also going to get a feel for the types of conversations where you know it's a one-way street, and you get to decide to stop, to pause, to not engage, to not take a single step further. And like I say, just let what they say fill the room. Don't get drawn in. Remember to use your out breath, and don't take the bait. We only get involved in a game when we decide to return the ball. And it's as simple as letting the ball drop down by the side of your feet and walking away, or just observing the ball and doing nothing with it. Eventually that person is going to have to come around the other side of the net and pick that ball up. And you're not going to be the one that does that for them. You're not going to be the one that makes it better. You're not going to be the one that gets involved in the game. So remember, Christmas is not the time to educate. And this is about self-preservation. This is about keeping you calm and allowing you to take a step back from game playing and bigoted views. So the next tip, and I think this is one of the most foundational tips that I can give you before you set foot into anywhere. Even if you're not going anywhere for Christmas, even if you're deciding to fly solo, I can't emphasize this enough, is prepare your internal foundations about your worth. This is about you getting clear on one thing to develop your own internal shock absorbers. That your worth is not dependent on your finances, your looks, your clothing, your job, your partner status. Laying these foundations internally before you even set foot into a toxic family or difficult family dynamic will be your resting place when times get tough. Remember that you don't need anyone to validate you, but you do need to validate your own thoughts and your own convictions when you're around these types of people. And I think it's important to recognize that sometimes when we go back into a family dynamic, particularly where families are motivated by conditions like job status or financial status or materialism, it's really easy to get sucked into that and to start comparing yourself and telling yourself a really disempowering message. And nearly every client that sits down in front of me at some level has learnt that their worth is dependent on some type of conditions that they've learnt from childhood, and starting to recognize those conditions of what you've been responding to for your whole life will be the thing that turns the key in the door that allows you to not care about them anymore, to not really give a shit if you have an auntie or an uncle or a mum or a relative who is bigging somebody up because of a condition that they've met that the other person thinks is the source of worth for human existence. It's just not. And it's just so important to realize that you have worth irrespective of any condition. You don't need to rely on conditions to be worthy. You're worthy by the mere fact that you exist. And that can be really hard to remember when you're thrown into those types of situations. So I really want you to give this some thoughts, because some of you are going to come across that type of behavior when you're in and around your family members this Christmas. But just remembering who you are is not what you have or what you do. Who you are remains irrespective of any condition that you've been conditioned to think that you need to have. So this leads nicely into the next tip. And that is, start to empower your own inner narrative. Not just about Christmas, but in general as well. If you're having a Christmas where you're on your own, you've suffered a loss, or it's not going to be what you planned, one of the most anxiety-provoking things that you can do is start to internalize your thoughts into ideas and then into feelings. It's going to feel like, or I know that I'm going to feel, or it's going to be terrible. When you tell yourself that you're going to feel something, or create yourself a disempowering narrative, you will feel it in the form of anticipatory anxiety, because the words that you tell yourself have so much power, because they don't just describe something, they create what can feel like a live internal experience. If I was to sit here and say words like sad, lonely, alone, not good enough, and if you're someone with a vivid imagination, you'll notice fleeting images, pictures or sounds in your mind that start to take shape. Creating a story in your mind is the gateway to the subconscious, and it will take you somewhere. Usually a mental movie that plays out offering up a feeling, and that feeling can feel compelling and, depending on what you're telling yourself, very disempowering. Sitting with your feelings isn't about allowing them to consume you. It means that you can notice what you're feeling, acknowledge them if they are painful, but don't let yourself go down the rabbit hole of being self-deprecating and cruel. When you use emotional reasoning as your narrative over logic and facts, you're going to feel a whole heap worse. There's an exercise that I do with my clients when needed, and this is around this very point. I want you to think about two concepts here. Think about the word alone, and think about what types of narratives or images that brings up in your mind and how that makes you feel. And then when you've done that, I want you to think about the word independence. Now, if you're like me, words like choice, freedom, strength, those are the types of things that I connect to with that word independence. And so I think recognizing that you have the tools and the ability and the skills to empower your own narrative just by the words that you say to yourself can be very freeing in allowing you not to be consumed by terrible stories, really cruel and disempowering stories. I think it's really important for you to be able to do that, to start to empower your own inner narrative. And you'll really notice the difference when you start to do this. And I think it's another really important point is to be present, because it's not about what's happened. I'm not dismissing what you're feeling about the past or what you might be feeling about the situation that you find yourself in. But when we get caught up in our minds, we end up going into a story. And I think just recognizing that you can create a story that's based on reality rather than something that you anticipate. If you are worried or nervous, or this is your first Christmas that you're spending independently, I think just recognizing that you can be present, you can choose to be present, you can empower yourself to do that. You can decide to create a narrative which supports your choices rather than diminishes them. And so the final tip that I want to give to you, which follows on really nicely from everything that we've talked about so far, is be an individual. You don't have to follow the hype and get on board with all the media and the marketing around Christmas. Remember that advertising is nothing more than performative conditioning, and the masses who don't take the time to think critically about themselves as individuals and what they want will ultimately just run the race without any thought with the majority. This is about encouraging you to be brave enough to stay in your own lane and not get swept away with the chaotic circus that society has created around Christmas. I don't know about you, but I've spoken to a lot of people over the past few weeks who are frantically running around having hordes of guests into their home, and they're dreading it, but they haven't stopped to ask themselves, what do I want and what do I think? So if you think about it, advertising messages and everything that we see around Christmas, not just Christmas, but advertising, it has a profound effect on mental health. And it's really easy just to get totally swept up in all of that, because we spend most of November and December being exposed to emotionally charged stories about what Christmas is supposed to mean. And these are nothing but inaccurate messages and do nothing but make you feel pressure to spend money, be with people who you may not want to be around, and feel some sense of shame or even scared of being depicted as not measuring up if you don't want to spend it independently or get involved with it. I want you to decide on what it means to you and what you'd like to do as your own person in your own right. If you've experienced a loss or you're still grieving, then you shouldn't feel pressured to have Christmas as usual if it doesn't feel right. And this is going to be really different for each of you. But remember, you have the power to give yourself permission to do exactly as you please, as you want to do. Because at the end of the day, all of this hype, it's 24 hours. And then on Boxing Day, you'll see the Easter eggs on the shelves of the supermarkets. And that's just a clear sign of how fleeting and superficial it's become. So if you're choosing to be an individual and do your own thing over Christmas, then kudos to you. It shows that you're happy and comfortable to do your own thing. It shows that you have that strength of mind. It shows that you have that resilience and that you're just not willing to follow the crowd and get sucked into all of that. So now this part of the show is going to focus on sharing with you and answering a question that I took inside of the Braver Women Facebook community from Sam. And she says, I'm a widowed parent of 2 young men. My in-laws have been difficult and my own family is far away. I feel like I have to make Christmas special, and it can feel like a huge pressure and can feel lonely too. So firstly, Sam, I'm really sorry that you're experiencing this type of pressure, and having listened to everything that we've talked about so far, I hope it's given you some comfort. But I want to give you some points to focus on to help you. And so the first one is, when we don't feel enough or when we experience a loss, particularly where kids are involved, we can often move into try to overcompensate for all of that. And that in itself can feel like a huge pressure. You know, I think it would be really important for you to stop and recognize your worth, Sam, and start to challenge some of the ideas and pressure that you're putting on yourself. You don't have to measure up. And like I've said throughout this show, your worth is not determined by what you do or what you don't do. And I think that even though it's going to be difficult and you're going to be reminded of that loss, I think it's really important for you just to allow those uncomfortable and difficult emotions to be present inside of yourself and in them, without you putting all of that pressure on yourself to try and do something extra or on top of what you would normally have done. And an idea that I thought about, and I don't know how you feel about this, but lighting a candle and to mark their presence and the deeply felt love that you had for your partner, your spouse, before they passed away, could be a really nice touch to be able to feel like you're acknowledging their presence, but also not trying to push away the uncomfortable emotions that come with that loss. And it also allows for more open and transparent communication around what each of you are feeling. And I think by doing that, you start to become a lot more present. And with life the way it is at the moment, I think one of the best presents that we can give to each other in our families or otherwise with our chosen families is to be fully present in a way that allows people to be able to express themselves freely. Because when you do that, you start to create deeper bonds and intimacy, and you don't gloss over things. You're allowed to be able to talk about it. You create a safe space where people can be heard, feelings can be felt. I think a lot of the suffering that we experience can really be amplified by what we don't talk about, what we feel that we have to hide or squash down or gloss over. And so by being able to create that environment for you and the boys, I wonder if that would go a long way in just helping you to realize that you don't have to be or do anything more than who you already are. You know, you're their mum, and it's not all on you when you're dealing with your own emotions, but also adult children. And they have to take some responsibility. They have to take some responsibility too for contributing to the day. And I think having honest and open discussions about what you're able to provide and what you feel capable of delivering with them could be really important. And this idea that you have that I feel I have to make Christmas special and it can feel like a huge pressure. I wonder if you can recognize now where this is coming from. How much more special does it need to get than you sharing the day with your two sons and them coming home to see you? And I think focusing on that idea just helps you stop trying to prove. Stop trying to measure up to an expected norm. Just be there with them, be present, and express your love for them. And like I said, create some intimacy by doing some of the really simple things that you don't get to do as a family. You know, you can create your own special moments by being together and just keeping it nice and simple. You know, special moments don't come from superficial, fleeting moments of excitement, but the deeper and more intimate moments of joy from togetherness, looking after each other, feeling loved, giving and expressing love and affection for each other, and also becoming excited at the time that you have and the reflection of how far you've come as a family, memories and the things that have gone by, but also the things that you can look forward to together as a family. Things like taking photographs, walks, games around the table, and all the things that families only appear to do once a year. You know, we have such busy lives, and a lot of people just have their focus on work and things that are going on, and they don't notice what's really going on around them. And I wonder if people really took the time to do more of the connection stuff, this type of stuff, the way that we do at Christmas, if they were able to do that more and more in their lives as a featured, a frequent norm, the positive impact that would have on family connections and people's mental health in general. It's easy, Sam, to get lost in it all and feel like you're not measuring up. But I want to tell you this, that try not to go on social media and start looking at pictures and getting drawn in as to what everybody else is doing, because I guarantee you that no one is going to be Instagramming that they're having a shit time. And the truth is that life is really complicated and messy. And with regards to your other family, it's okay that old wounds don't magically heal. Family feuds aren't forgotten, and problems don't suddenly solve themselves just because it's Christmas. And I've always found that the most special moments come from spontaneity and just not planning. Planning never really goes to plan. So why not just let yourself and your boys embrace those unexpected moments that can come when you decide that you're going to focus on being yourself rather than having to perform? Because, like I've said, by you just being yourself, you give permission to the boys to do the same thing, and they can create some of the best moments of intimacy together. Not all families are exactly the same, Sam. Everybody is different. Not everyone is doing the same thing, and the only pressure that you'll put on yourself to perform to an expected standard or to make it special is the one that you get from comparing yourself to everybody else around you. And I think when you stop comparing and start focusing on your own connection, your own family values, and what you want to achieve during the time that you have with your sons, it's going to be really crucial here. And I want you to remember this, that it's your Christmas. It's your Christmas as well. And you are just as important as everybody else in your family, including your sons. So I hope that helps you, Sam, and I hope it gives you some comfort. And I hope that it's allowed you to think about some things that can take the pressure away from how you're approaching Christmas this year. So I'm going to wrap this up now. And just to recap on some of the concepts that we've talked about to help you. So number one, if you're estranged from your family, I want you to remember that it's not about you. Okay? Family is not always about blood. It's about bonds and the connections that you share with people that care about you. Number three is decide upon your role and create a new narrative around your family. Don't go getting caught up in those previous roles that you had when you were growing up. It doesn't have to be that way anymore, and you can change that. Number four is prepare and have a repertoire to set your limits and your boundaries. Make sure that you plan what you're going to say, recognize what your threshold is, and decide when enough is enough and what you're going to do to be able to exit uncomfortable situations. Number five, remember that Christmas is not the time to educate. This is about not getting involved in the games and keeping yourself calm and not giving away your personal power by getting wrapped up in other people's really bigoted views. Remember that phrase, ignorance is a poor substitute for wisdom. Just keep that mantra in mind when this type of behavior emerges. And number six, the most important one, as far as I'm concerned, is prepare your internal foundations about your worth. This is crucial. Number seven is start to empower your own narrative about Christmas. And this is really important. The words that you're saying to yourself and what that's creating inside of you. You have the power now to be able to be kind and to choose more empowering words that support what your choices are this Christmas. And finally, number 8, be an individual. You don't have to get caught up in the rat race. You can choose to do your own thing, choose to set your own tradition, and choose to do exactly what's right for you and what you please. So if you celebrate Christmas, I want to wish you a really Merry Christmas, and I hope you have a wonderful time. And if you don't celebrate Christmas, then I hope that you manage to get some time to yourself. I hope that you manage to find some peace and reflection. And I'll catch up with you in the next episode. Thanks for listening.